Hello and welcome. We're back. My name's Julie Brown, and I'm here with my friends and colleagues,
David Kennedy
and Red Keating.
And we're returning to our podcast here in partnership with Hospice Peterborough. You may or may not have noticed that we've been absent for a while. But in that absence, we've been working hard at really reflecting on this podcast, the direction we want to see it move in, how we kind of want to brand it out to the world. And so we've made some changes. Thanks to Hospice Peterborough, we've invested in some really great sound equipment. So hopefully you can hear us a little better and the quality's better. And we were just saying, hopefully it doesn't sound like we're in a echoey room anymore. And one of the things we did is we really took some time to think about our title, to make sure our title, the name of the podcast is really encapsulating what we want this podcast to be about. So Red, can you share a little bit about that?
Oh, sure. We bantered around quite a bit of
we sure did.
Names, and sometimes it's even hard to remember what we've called it. But we're now set on what now as a question. When someone is presented with a life-altering event, a life-threatening illness, and that process and maybe dying is in front of them, they may ask the question, what now? And I think it was David, you came up with the concept of a threshold, which I was really struck with. And so the subtitle, or the small bit of the title, is On the Threshold of Life, Death, and Grief. And we kind of thought that captured maybe what we're going to be talking about over this next little series of talks.
Yeah, I really like the idea of threshold, because it allows for both to be present. The threshold is somewhere where we've come to. So all of what has happened to us is part of our experience in that moment. But a threshold is also that point at which something new is going to happen. It's where we're going. So it's that moment of of real reflection of what's happened to me, and then the what now, and allows us to find our way.
Mm-hmm. Right. And you kind of have to step through.
And you have to step through.
And you don't really get a choice sometimes,
No.
right?
And it's going to be different on the other side.
It
Yep.
is.
You're leaving where you were,
Yep.
and you're entering a new place that might be strange or different, right?
So, in summary, our new title of our podcast is What Now? On the Threshold of Life, Death, and Grief. So thanks for joining us in this new season of our podcast. And so to get us started, we thought kind of the obvious place to start with this new season of podcasts would be just to speak in general terms about grief. Grief and loss, it's part of all of our lives. It will continue to be part of all of our lives. And so we're going to start there today.
I think too, Julie, that what struck me these last 2.5 years since COVID and pandemic is that in a strange way, so many things of our life were put on hold. So many activities of life were canceled. But death didn't stop. And in fact, it increased. But the reality of death as a cycle of life kept going. But we were not able to deal with death the way we normally. And so I think it's accentuated this whole piece of grief. And I think it's a real good place for us to talk today, because it just struck me how, everything can be put on hold except death. And it happens. And we face that in our life no matter what happens.
And such a great point, David, because I believe that we are going to feel the reverberations of that for months and years to come, because of some of the experiences that people had of death, of grief through this pandemic. And I know I'm certainly hearing about that from my clients and my friends and family.
Which all leads me to our first sense of grief, which is it's normal. It's not a pathological piece of life. It's what we are all going to experience.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny because you guys were talking about something, but in our culture really does not want to address death and grief all that much. And the pandemic has really sort of helped sort of support that, because so many people have put off. I'm thinking about our podcast on rituals, put off the rituals of funeral, put off the rituals, and we have, our memorials of life and celebrations of life, and they've been sort of delayed, and everything has sort of been pushed to the side. And like you said, but death keeps happening, and it's the one guarantee that we have in life, and it's the one experience that we're all going to share. We'll all have a different death, but we're all going to find our way to the threshold. And so why we don't talk about it as a culture is very interesting, because of that fear that it creates in all of us, that anxiety of the unknown, and that life is going to be different. It will not be the same after the death of someone you love, right? It will not be the same after your death for those who love you and are left behind. And so that fear of the unknown, that crossing the threshold, really does... It does a disservice that we don't talk about it more, because we're all going to be there.
And I think that fear of death itself is what keeps us from understanding grief.
Right.
So if we're afraid to talk about death, then nobody's going to talk about the grief piece. And then when we're faced with grief, it's this sudden shock. It's like, oh my gosh, we've never talked about this. And that's part of this cycle of or the reason of when you are pushing death away in a society and not wanting to talk about it or face it, then the grief that follows doesn't get a chance to have that kind of acknowledgement.
And so on that note, you can then understand why people are often bewildered when they're trying to navigate their grief many weeks and many, many months or years out from the death, because it hasn't so often been normalized. And one of the things I see is, we're often quite good at showing up with our casseroles and with our, expressions of care immediately. And of course, that's very, very important, because that can often, really buoy up a person and a family through those initial days and weeks. But grief is a very long
shelf life.
There's no expiration date on that, right? And so it often becomes very invisible to others around you, but it doesn't feel invisible, both, in your body, in your mind, emotionally and spiritually.
Well, and it runs counter to our positive, happy culture as well.
Oh,
that sense of we're all supposed to be happy, and you're supposed to get over it. Okay, we brought the casserole, you've had a couple of weeks, stop being sad so that you don't make me uncomfortable. You're hard to be around because you're always crying. You're a real downer. Right. And then people get really upset by the fact that they haven't gotten over it the way everybody wants them to, so that they're comfortable. And how many times have you been with people saying, it's not something you get over? It's something that you learn to live with. It's transitioning into a new world, and you as a new person without that loved one in it. But it's all about getting over.
I just think of the number of times I've heard. I can remember a specific incident with a coworker who had just lost their father, and they had just returned to work. It had only been about a week, and I checked in with the person, and he said, "I'm okay, getting better every day.
Yeah,
every day's a little better. Easier." And I looked at him and I said, "Really? Is that true?" And then we went on, and it's like, no, that's not true at all. Yeah. But that is the attempt to go, okay, I got to integrate back into society. And what that means is, it's our good vibes only culture, right? It's like, I just need to be, I hear a lot of, I just need to be grateful. I need to be grateful that we had them as long as we did, or that we, that people have been so helpful. And of course, all that's important, but that in no way, changes our grief or the space that the grief needs to have.
And I think that's why, these theories around grief, the one, of course, that people immediately trigger to is the 5 stages, which is a very linear. That's that every day I just get better and better, and then once I get that 5th stage out of the way, I'm fine. But we know that grief is not linear. It's not like that. It's 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. It's up, it's down, it's all over the place for a long time. And that's, again, not something that's wrong with you. And I think it's important to identify the difference between grief and mourning, or how we find our way to express that. Because grief is what happens to us as a result of that loss. And we don't get to choose. We don't get to choose what that looks like or how it impacts us. The only choice we have is, what do we do with that grief? How do we find a way to honor that outwardly? And that can be ritual, can be simply, you mentioned crying and tears. That's mourning. That's the way in which we find a way to express how we're feeling, that grief, what grief has done to us.
But we don't like the mess. We like the
We don't
five
like
steps.
the mess, right?
I just need to say, poor Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who
Yes.
who designed those 5 steps, never meant for
never.
it to be
Never.
used
No.
the way it was.
No.
But
Because we like the prescription.
we like prescriptions.
And if we do all the things, then it will be done. Because I think that's the other piece. People also go, will this ever end? And of course, the answer is no. It won't ever end. Life will get easier. Every day will get a little bit lighter. But you will always miss and grieve for the person that's lost. The person that has died is not coming back. And that's like, life will never be the same again.
But we don't have to be afraid of that.
No. But we're always afraid. I mean, I hear it all the time. Will I always feel this way?
Right.
Will I always feel this way? And I always say, it's kind of like water. It's like a tide. It'll roll in. If you let it roll in and feel it, guess what? You'll learn that it goes back out again, right? And if you let it in and you feel it, but we don't want to feel those things, so we distract ourselves, Maybe we throw ourselves back into work like that guy you were talking about, Julie, or maybe, we keep ourselves very busy doing things so that we don't feel. And I think that's part of the problem, is it's such an uncomfortable feeling that we don't want to feel it, so we can sometimes busy ourselves with work, maybe substances, just to numb that sense of sadness that we have. But if we let it roll in and feel it, we'll then learn that it goes back out again. And that over time, the water doesn't come in as regularly or as frequently.
or as intensely.
It stays out, and it's not as intense, exactly.
Yeah.
But you don't know that when you're in the middle of it, or, you have to live through that to understand that will happen if you allow yourself to feel the grief, that it will not appear as often, and when it does appear, it won't be as intense.
So can we just take a few moments just to talk about how grief can show up for us? Because I think when we think of someone who's had a loss, we think of sadness. We think of the person crying. But actually, grief manifests in us in so many different ways. So can we just take a few moments?
Well, let me focus on one, and then you can find some others. But the one that I think people miss, and it kind of picked up where you were going, Red, was grief is very social. Grief impacts us socially, and that's the long-term piece of it. So if your life partner dies, you suddenly are on the threshold of this new life journey without that person physically with you. I mean, they'll always be in your heart. But socially, it changes us. I remember my mom when after my dad died. He died in February. And Mom and Dad were very connected into a church group and seniors group and all that, and a very active seniors group. And they always had this huge Christmas dinner. And so Dad died in February. So by we're down the road 10 months, 11 months. And I said to Mom, so Mom, do you want me to get you a ticket for the seniors banquet this year? And she said, oh, I don't think I'm going to go. And I said, okay, can you tell me why you might want to? You're not going to go? Well, I don't know who I'll sit with. And that just, that idea of socially connection. Who do I sit with? Where do I fit in now? When the other person is present with us, we kind of find our way socially in the crowds. But now we have to find a new way of being present with people. So it really does change us socially.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So true.
It's funny, you said that the first thing I thought was isolation, right? Some people cut themselves off from others, right? Because for whatever reasons, they don't want to feel the pressure of others to be happy. They don't want to have questions asked of them because they're not ready to talk about it. And sometimes when you're socially isolated, then you can feel socially frozen, right? And your house stays the same and nothing is moved, nothing is touched. You hear the story of a child that dies and their bedroom is the same 5 years later. It's just been untouched. It's almost like a museum. I don't want to hog the mic here, but the other one is irritability. Just if you have that sense of irritability and you don't know where it's coming from, think about, it could be grief if you're just constantly kind of going through life a little irritated and frustrated and just, but you can't figure out why. You know, you don't understand where that feeling is coming from.
I was thinking about all of what I'm hearing that, you know, relates to the social part is the cognitive nature of grief. That I often say there's a cognitive load to grieving that we often don't recognize. And so sometimes socializing it almost just feels like too much. It's like our brain gets overloaded. I can't stand the sound. I can't stand that many conversations. I can't track the conversation when there's music playing in the background. And like that's something that we often don't take into account, right? So sometimes people don't want to be out because it feels like too much. Like it feels like their brain is full or on fire. And that's also where that irritability piece can come out, Red, where, you know, if I'm feeling like my brain is so full and I can't take any more and there's too much stimulation, of course I'm going to be irritable. Of course my mood's going to fluctuate and I'm going to have maybe more moments where I'm grumpy. Let's talk about the physical components. How does grief show up physically?
Physically, yeah, the somatic pieces around, you know, the first one I think for many people is in most cases they can't sleep or they sleep too much, but most of it is I don't get enough sleep, and you know, I say to them that, well, you're not supposed to sleep. It's okay. Grief robs us of those pieces because we're just shocked into this. And if you wake up at 2 a.m. and you can't get back to sleep, that's okay. Take a nap the next day. Like, find ways to deal with this rather than trying to fight that. Now, sometimes people have to because they have to work. So, I mean, that's a challenge there. But the reality is sleeping, eating, those are normal pieces that get thrown upside down with grief.
Yeah, appetite's a big one.
Appetite,
you know,
is
just
a big
stop
one.
eating.
Yeah.
Or you
overeat. Yeah.
Or you overeat. I often notice like a weariness, like a feeling. I think of someone who once told me they were downstairs in their office building and their office was on the next floor, and they paused walking up the stairs and they sighed and just.
Everything is a burden.
Everything
is
feels heavy. Everything feels hard. My body feels like it weighs, 600 pounds. Like things feel hard. Sometimes I use the phrase like, do you feel like you're walking through water?
Yeah.
Do you feel like you're walking through a fog? It's very normal. Yeah.
And you don't have the energy. It's just not there. So if people if they assume that they should be able to do things, that should word, I used to be able to walk every morning. I just don't have the energy anymore. There must be something wrong with me. And yet recognizing and giving yourself permission to say, you know what, grief is very physical and my body is telling me that it's grieving. So I respect it.
And this is one of the ways we resist our grief, right? Is we think, I need to get back into my routine. I need to try to live my life the way it was before I was pushed across this threshold. But you're different.
You're different.
And your body's different. And your brain is different. And could we not resist that?
I was going to say, I'm glad you brought up brain, because often we don't think about our brain as part of our bodies. I mean, I don't know. But fog. You feel foggy. You can't concentrate. You have no focus. You can't remember things the way you used to be able to. And your mind might feel like it's just on that single track. And nothing is breaking in, and I think that's a physical reaction too. But I think sometimes we don't think of our mind as physical, but our brain is physical. So
the other major one that I want to make sure we get a moment to chat about is what I'll call the spiritual piece, which I want us to recognize is not a religious angle only. I mean, for some people that may be that when I talk about that, but I'm talking about if we think of our spirituality more in terms of our assumptive world, how we see ourselves in this world and how we find our way. So when certain deaths happen, particularly a death of a child, but I think all death brings us to that threshold of, okay, now what? Of changing everything we thought we were going to be, how life was supposed to work, is suddenly not possible. And we have to go through a huge spiritual transformation of finding our way and putting an assumptive worldview back into place that accounts for what has happened to us. And that is a challenge.
Yeah, that idea of like, this wasn't fair.
Right.
Or why did that happen to my mother when she lived such a healthy life? Or
Those are spiritual questions.
they're existential spiritual questions. And it's really normal that we start to grapple with that. And I often call that the existential reckoning. There's a reckoning that starts to happen where we start asking ourselves these bigger questions. And of course, there's not easy answers to those. Mm-hmm. And so part of that, again, is not resisting that. And like that is part of the process, is that we kind of are in this rumble with that.
Like
And
when
I
a life,
think that's-
oh, sorry, David.
Go ahead.
When a life partner dies, I've gone from being a couple to now being single. That's a huge transition. When a child dies, I might have gone from my identity as a parent. When a parent dies, maybe now I'm an orphan. All of those identities are existential in terms of who am I in this world that I thought was solid, safe, secure, and was going to be the same way moving forward forever and ever, right?
And that's why I think those pat answers are so horrible. When people try to give you those pat answers when you're having an
What are you thinking of?
Well, I'm thinking of telling people, it was all for the best, or there must have been a
They're in a
reason,
better
or
place.
They're in a better place.
Right. Yeah.
Those kinds of statements are, do not help us in any way in our grief.
Just be grateful that you had them for as long as you did.
Yeah, those kinds of statements.
In no way. It's very... it diminishes our grief. And what that says is there's not room for your grief here.
There's not room for exploring this new part of me.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a horrible thing to shut people down in grief. But I come back to what you said right early, Red, is often people shut down grief because of their own fear of it. It's not they're not really caring about the other person. They're caring about how it's affecting them in their world, and they don't want that.
I think that's so much part of our culture of our fear of pain, of suffering, and that if there's something wrong, meaning like you're sad, you're upset, this is a horrible thing that's happened, I can't fix that. And that makes me really uncomfortable that I can't fix it. Well, there's nothing to fix with grief. It's natural. It is a natural response. And so our job is not to fix it. It's not to make them happy. It's not to say, be grateful. Every day will get a little better. It's not, it's to witness it and to say, I'm here with you. And if in this moment we're laughing, and if in the next moment we're crying or we're angry, then I'm with you in that. And I can make space for whatever your experience is.
Yeah, it's not an illness.
It's not an illness.
It's a natural human condition, right?
Yeah.
And we aren't, but it's an uncomfortable natural human condition. And Dave, before we hit record, you were talking about, have to go through that first year. And then oftentimes, once the first year's over, you're standing at that threshold kind of going, oh my God, I got to go through it all over again. Right. Like I thought it was hard to get through it once. And it's that transition to this is a new life, and you'll go through it every year. That assumptive world, just because a year's gone by, hasn't changed. All the things are still not there in the next year and the next year and the next year.
On that note, can we just talk about that first year, just to kind of give, and of course everyone's different, but can we just kind of give some generalities here around sometimes what that first year is like?
I often find, and I never look at any kind of pattern as being definitive for everybody, but I have also recognized that there are a couple of moments where in that first year that are significant. And one of them, I think 3 months out is important. 6 months out is a very there often is a time then, and what changes in people at that point is that sense of, all right, I'm finding my way, I think I'm better, I think I'm good. And then all of a sudden, wham, and they're down and they say, what's wrong with me? I thought I was doing well.
Yeah, and the grief intensifies.
And for me, I think, and what I explain to them is, you have experienced the grief of what it means for a person to die. But you are now experiencing what it means that they're not living with you.
It's the permanency.
It's the permanency
Yes.
that starts to settle in around, oh my gosh, this is the way it's always going to be. They're not just away. I'm not just doing this. And the support diminishes, like you said earlier. The support diminishes around people after a few months. So they don't have that. But so it's a real dip, and it can be a challenge. But just encouraging them to say, this is what you're experiencing now, is that threshold of, oh my gosh, this isn't going to be different.
You're confronting your new reality.
You're confronting but you can't do that in the first week
No,
or
You
two.
can't.
No.
Nope.
You have no idea, because you haven't lived that piece long enough to realize what it means that they're not here with you. All of the routines, the way in which life unfolds, plus it might, 6 months, you may be facing holidays, different things that you've never faced before without that person. So that's my experience anyway.
Thank you for that. I really like how you kind of clarify that it's a new threshold around that 6-month mark. I also think there's that natural numbing that happens. I think most of us realize in the early days post-death that there's some shock, that there's some numbing. And what I often tell clients is that numbing actually lasts way longer than you think. Way longer. We're not talking days or weeks, but months, right? With a really significant, like a tragic death, a sudden death, death of a child, that numbing actually is much longer. And so that's also that part of when sometimes grief can intensify because some of that numbing has gone away. And that numbing is protective. That numbing has allowed you to still get up in the morning and function and go to work and pay your bills and whatever it is that you've needed to do. So that's not a pathological thing. That's a very protective mechanism that your nervous system and brain is engaged in for you.
Mm-hmm. One of the significant things that I hear about is that moment on that day when you get to the end of the day and you haven't thought about your loved one, and then you feel guilty. And it's like, no, that's actually an interesting day, because that means that you've engaged in your life in a way that was fulsome, and that it drew your attention to whatever it was you were doing. But it doesn't mean you've forgotten your loved one. But when that realization comes, I haven't thought about them this hour or this half a day or this whole day, that sense of guilt that comes from that I'm here and I'm living my life, and it's got to be okay. And it is okay. Because it's that confronting the new reality of it is me in a new way.
And I think that's a great point, Rad, that grief is not an ending. It tells us about an ending, but grief is also that threshold of, all right, we still have life to live, and life that we're going to be living isn't going to be done the way it was, but that doesn't mean it can't be done. And that person that has died will still be part of our life, just not the way they were.
Yeah.
And so finding a way to keep them present in a good way, finding a way to honor our grief. And so when you come to that day, and you're absolutely right, people get all freaked out with that. When you come to that day and that moment, I say to them, whatever you do, just honor that grief when it happens. When that moment, when you've remembered, it's okay. That's your time just to honor it.
Yep.
But not to put guilt upon yourself for that piece. That's part of our journey.
Yeah.
How do you think we can honor that continuing bond with the person once they've died? How have you? Can we just take a few moments just to kind of give some ideas around that?
I encourage them to keep talking about the person in a normal, natural way. So, just, so-and-so would like that. Or especially if there are grandchildren around, to really keep those stories going. Your grandpa or your grandma would really love those things. It's funny you say that, because I just was talking to a woman. They've been married for 69 years, and he died a little while ago. And she was saying, "Oh, it's my granddaughter's 21st birthday," and I said, "Well, when you give her the card, why don't you sign both of your names?" names to it, Grandpa and Grandma, and she said, oh, I could do that. And I said, well, he would want to sign that card, wouldn't he? Well, yes. So those are simple ways that are not, and they're not, there's nothing odd about them. Like people have this, this weird thing around, oh, that would be weird. It's not weird. It's
right.
it's
That in some
honoring
way, is that me not accepting the death
Right.
or
It's
like
not
writing his
It's
of
just
course
saying they're still part of your
They're
life.
still here
They're still here.
in a different way.
In a different way.
Can I share, David? I don't know if you remember this, but something you told me as a way to when my father died, a piece of advice you gave me in terms of that continuing bond was you said, when somebody compliments you or identifies a strength in you, and that came from your father, that's something that he taught you, say that. Well, my dad taught me that. Yeah. And I've passed that on to so many clients, and that's a great way to just, here he is right here, right? So if somebody says, well, you've got this great work ethic. Yeah, my dad really modeled that for me in my life. So there's lots of simple ways. That was my aunt's favorite meal, right? She loved this. Yeah.
I always say you're the keeper now. You're the keeper of their stories, their memory. And that's different than building a shrine in your house, so to speak. But you're carrying them in your heart. You're carrying them in your memory. And you are now the keeper of that story. So you can bring that person forward with you into your new life in a different way, not a physical way, but certainly through stories, through honoring, what it is that they've taught you or given you. And so I would just say you're the keeper now, which is an incredibly important job.
I like that.
To keep the stories and the memory of a person.
I love that too.
I like that because it also, and I encourage that people, particularly around certain types of death, suicide, accident, where there can be judgment pieces. And I really encourage people, you're the keeper of their story. Not everybody needs to know it. You get to choose. When is that appropriate, and when do you want to share that story? Mm-hmm. But there may be some people who you don't want to share that story with. Right. And to give them permission that they are the keeper of that story, and to make sure it's told in a good, positive way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Before I might run us a little bit over here, but I do think it might be important for us to talk about what happens when someone turns to substances as a way of numbing, as a way of coping, and what we can do. Because I think that's a common thing, and we don't talk about it, right? We see someone who's experienced a significant loss, and maybe they're drinking too much, or maybe they're smoking too much, and we don't know what to do. And I think that's a common thing. And
shopping.
Gambling. Oh my gosh, shopping is a
huge one, right?
Yeah.
Some of retail therapy, and of course we normalize that as society, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes, so we don't, or even the way we can scroll through social media, we can numb through that.
Yeah, and maybe is that another podcast? I don't know, but it might be a bit late to bring it up now. But I think that's an important piece because we can see that distracting us from our grief. It's that thing that's numbing. It's moving us away from our grief.
I think it's really important, and I think it's really important not to begin with judgment.
Oh, absolutely.
I think it's something that we help them to. Unfortunately, it gets judged so quickly.
And it's a natural thing to do. Why wouldn't I numb myself? I'm in pain.
Right.
Yeah, the anguish that I am feeling, and these glasses of wine every night give me some relief from that.
They help me sleep. They help me relax, and it's just so tempting.
So I come back to what you said, Julie, earlier about it's a matter of sitting with people in there. I mean, if substances and those pieces are ways in which getting somebody or something to be with me.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
So, and I think our job at first, when fresh grief happens and early grief, everybody's trying to pull that. If you picture it in this person in a pit, and the pit of grief, everybody's trying to pull them out. What they really need is somebody just to go down and sit with them. Mm-hmm. They'll get out eventually. We'll get out. But that first, and if nobody is there to do that, then often we look for those substances to numb. And again, I acknowledge that without judgment with people, and just try to say, okay, what is that? What do you I don't ask them what they need because they don't know what they need. But just a matter of, what would it be like for you if you could phone somebody and have somebody any time of the day rather than doing that.
Right.
Would that be something? Anyway, it might be another podcast.
Right.
I think it might
could
be.
Very
I think
well
because
could
I
be.
can feel all of us have more to say on that subject, right? So I think we're going to start to wrap up here today, and I just final thoughts. Let's just all of us just I know we all have so much more we could say, but just final thoughts for now.
I think for me, it's about where I began. It's part of our life experience, and rather than trying to quickly get over it, let's honor it. This grief is important, and it's worth me taking time to be with and to find it. The flip side, if I know somebody who has experienced a loss, my role is not to be the answer for them. My role is to be with them and just simply to acknowledge, not try to get over it.
Yeah. I think that concept of witnessing, climbing in the hole with the person is a good one. I always think it happens because you risk to love. And so it is sort of the cost of love. And that might sound kind of cliche, but we wouldn't grieve if we didn't love.
If it didn't matter.
If it didn't matter, if that person wasn't significant to us, then we wouldn't have a reaction. We might have a slight reaction, but lots of people die every day. We don't know them. We don't have that same reaction. And so it's love. And grief and love are inseparable. And if you take the risk, then you're inviting grief. And so we should actually really learn how to do this better as a society, to be with people, to witness their grief, and to journey with them through sort of those darker, what we would say darker times or sadder times.
Yeah, and I think I would echo, of course, what both of you were saying, just that idea that grief needs space. We need to allow it to take up space. And for those of us who are experiencing it, supporting someone, there's no fixing it. But the good news is that, you don't have, that's the good news. There's there's nothing to be done to get down in the hole and say, I'm right here with you. I'm right here. So thanks. That's the end of our return to our new podcast, What Now? On the Threshold of Life, Death, and Grief. Thanks, David. Thanks, Fred.
Hey, thanks.